What makes Thomas Shelby so likable and compelling? He is a man that has done and continues to do horrible things, yet we root for him time and time again. Thus is Cillian Murphy's portrayal of what I argue is one of the best anti-heroes in fiction to date. We know everything went down for Tommy and for the Shelby family in general after his service in World War I. Before that, however, his life wasn't all roses, which serves as a catalyst for our sympathy for this horrible person. We know his mother struggled with depression, possibly some variant of bipolar. I base this on the fact that she on a whim bought a horse shortly before she killed herself. We know the family didn't have any money, and yet here she is buying a horse, which she eventually succumbed to. We know his father was a swindling lowlife who abandoned his children. Modern-day IRL research has proven that a father's abandonment is far more detrimental to his children than that of a mother's, and boys are affected more than girls. Look at how Arthur is and behaves when his father comes back for a short while. We also know the family was very poor. Tommy tells the story of how he once bought a pineapple and a top hat with the family's grocery money for the week. When he came back, his mother beat him with a frying pan. This, along with the abandonment of his father, has real-life undertones. There is a certain amount of shame a lot of times in people who come from lower-class families. They're cognizant that they're not like others. They can't have the same food and clothes other people have. And while Tommy has the fact he settled in Birmingham going for him, grew up in an impoverished working-class area, the fact he bought an exotic fruit and a fancy hat shows his yearning for something better. However, he's not spoiled. This yearning turns into an indignation. At a young age, he's aware of the class and social divides, admitting to his thoughts of, why can't we have nice things too? Why does our money have to be spent on bread and lard? We also know pre-war he was an idealist. He was a communist, and probably what Ada was for a time. Younger siblings tend to want to be like their older ones. We see this time and time again in Ada and Finn. While communism never works once you add the human factor, on paper, the ideals of communism aren't bad. It also says a lot about Tommy's core personality and set of beliefs. To make matters worse, Tommy falls in love. It's a forbidden love, but after a while, he's suave enough and kind enough to win over her family. But his girlfriend falls ill, eventually dying from her illness. It is this that spurs him into volunteering for World War I, and once again, I assume, he talked to Arthur and John into joining him. While this is never explicitly stated, based on his ability to sway people and to get them to do what he wants, this is probably how it went down. So we have a man already scarred from a horrible home life and losing his first love. Then he goes into World War I, getting stuck with the hardest jobs to boot. He wins medals for his bravery, but the entire situation leaves him disenfranchised and nihilistic. He becomes a staunch atheist and throws the medals he won into the river. This spurs his want for more, the seeds of which were planted in his childhood. He becomes greedy and power-hungry. Upon returning, he wants his family to be more than petty thieves and bookmakers. If he can't get what he wants, he takes it. This includes his relationship with Polly and Arthur. By that time, the family is an infamous razor gang, but Tommy doesn't agree with it. He wants to take the family on a more ambitious route, especially after his misfortune of having the guns placed in his lap. He uses his brains and cunning to push Arthur aside as the leader. He uses situations to his advantage, effectively pushing Polly out of opposition and rank too. Although at least she put up a fight, unlike most who just blindly follow Tommy. We are shown how ruthless Tommy can be. Slicing the Lee camp's faces after an insult was lobbed at him is just one example. We are also shown he is fearless. He gets himself and those around him in dangerous situations. For a while there, it seemed like he made a sport out of getting himself into violent places. More on that later. We know this stems from the war. He knows how to calm animals, out of love for them and also from spending years in close quarters with them, even violent ones. Another facet of this fearlessness stems from the acknowledgement of his own mortality. He believes by all accounts he should be dead already, killed in the war. Everything after is extra. He is very nonchalant towards his own personal safety because of this. However, for as ruthless as he can be, we are shown time and time again he's a very damaged man. Thus, the anti-hero. For every atrocious thing he does, it is nearly always followed up by a scene showing his human side. His brutality is stripped away from us, showing the everyman. He clings to his ideals. Literally, the first time we see Tommy, he's shown giving money to a charity. Season 1, as he is riding his horse, right before he reaches the garrison, he bends down. Already we are shown his juxtaposition, a dark man on a dark horse in a dark place that brings to mind a hellish landscape, yet here he is doing a good deed. Further examples are scattered throughout the show. The orphanages he erects, his various charities, the fact he offers monetary compensation for the families who had innocent bystanders caught up in the Peaky's business and were killed. In one deleted scene from Season 5, we're shown he has every intention to start an institution for shell-shocked war veterans, which is mixed in with a heated conversation with Polly regarding her resignation, marriage, and the fact that he's doing dealings with Mosley. Tommy also has a bit of a vigilante complex. There are two examples that really stick out in my head. When it becomes knowledge to him that Father Hughes molested Michael, he wants Michael to be the one who kills him. The next example is how Season 5 opens with the nuns. There are several more, but this side of him is very Batman-esque and makes us want to root for Tommy. Now I want to delve into Tommy's problems. I discussed a few above, but there are finer points I think should be addressed. PTSD is a major subplot throughout the show, and mental health in general. We are presented with a family that suffers from mental illnesses, most prominently it seems depression. Seeing as this appears to be hereditary within the Shelby bloodline, this mental instability is exacerbated by the horrors of war. We know Arthur was suicidal in his youth and is now suffering from PTSD. I always come back to the scene where Arthur has tried to kill himself and says how his head is like a barge with the cargo swaying back and forth. Tommy is pissed. I think it's because he recognizes that within himself and out of frustration because he himself, up until the most recent season, has been able to function while living with PTSD. Which leads me to a crucial point in understanding Tommy and the show as a whole. If you put it in historical context, shell shock was largely misunderstood. Men who served were thrown back into society after being in literal hell and were expected to just go back to business as usual. There was also the mindset that men should be strong, and to display or talk about emotions was frowned upon as weakness. A mindset that is prevalent in modern society still, ergo the buzz term toxic masculinity. To delve further, I'd like to discuss PTSD IRL terms. Without getting overly scientific, people with PTSD often reenact their traumas, often subconsciously. From a mental standpoint, this feeds into Tommy's attributes. He wants control after being powerless in a war. He probably became so over-the-top violent after killing people for years on end. PTSD also rewires the brain. This is where I get fuzzy because I'm not a doctor, but I know it literally physically changes the brain. People with PTSD are in a constant, heightened fight-or-flight mode. There is a literal inability to stop producing stress hormones. Now, let's also look at common symptoms PTSD has and what they gauge people against to determine if someone suffers from PTSD and compare it to Tommy. Intrusive thoughts, check. Hyperarousal, check. Flashbacks, nightmares, check. Sleep disturbances, check. Changes in concentration, prevalent in Season 5. Startle response, check. That last one catches my attention. While we're shown Tommy isn't just a jumpy or easily startled person, when there are shots fired or an explosion, he doesn't just flinch, he cowers. Now, I don't know if it was subconscious or Cillian Murphy's part or something that the writers wanted him to do, or probably sheer coincidence, but anytime something loud happens, if he's not firing back, he covers his head. Those around him flinch and take cover, but I noticed he covers his head an awful lot. As an aside, I also believe Tommy suffers from comorbid PTSD. As originally stated, his childhood was horrible and he lost his first love. That's a lot for someone to go through, especially someone so young while their brain is developing. Another one of Tommy's problems is shame. Now, at first glance, fans of the show wouldn't categorize Tommy as a shameful person. However, as previously discussed, there is a certain amount of shame about his lower class status. He wants better. He thinks he and his family deserve better. Yes, there's a certain pride to it. I'm just an extreme example of what the working man can accomplish. But you see bits and pieces that he wasn't born into. The simple life bothers him. Tommy is also shameful when he's outwitted. The fact that he's been strong-armed time and time again, he keeps a lid on it. He doesn't share when he's being used by Campbell. He doesn't share when he's being used by the IRA. He initially refuses to tell anyone about his dealings with the Russians. He tries to mitigate the fact he's being used by the crown to do their dirty work as best he can manage. In all of these instances, he makes his family think he's the one in charge of the situation, even when it's not entirely the case. Earlier seasons, he's been smart enough to weasel out of these situations. Later, he becomes a barracuda swimming with an ocean of great white sharks. It's becoming harder for him to hide his failures, and this brings extreme shame to him. Tommy also tries to cover up his shame through self-medication, which is ironic because he told Arthur and Polly not to take drugs. He is ashamed he hears the shovels against the wall, so he smokes opium. He's ashamed he actually has PTSD, so he tries to block out the thoughts with alcohol. I get the feeling addictions run in the family too. I think Tommy is literally addicted to not only drugs, but power itself, which leads me to my next 2 points. In the times we see Tommy emotionally vulnerable, he hides away. He doesn't want people to see his weak side. He doesn't want people to know he's weak. However, as time goes on, it becomes harder, if not impossible, for him to conceal his cracks. Tommy is also ashamed of fear. Anytime he fails or think he might, he just clamps down harder. He schemes more. He thirsts to be infallible, showing everyone his God complex is justified. Even when he's wrong, even when he sacrifices his family for the bigger picture and the greater good, he does it out of fear of failure. I think Tommy genuinely wanted what was best for his family. As time went on, it all got jumbled up in his head. Tommy has come to an extremely distorted view of reality. He projects his nihilism onto others. He's come to see people not as friends, not as family, but as pawns. The last line of Red Right Hand sums up Tommy perfectly. You're one microscopic clog in his catastrophic plan, designed and directed by his red right hand. He has nothing to live for. Everything after is just extra. But what he utterly fails to see is that those around him have things to live for. The people around him want to live and grow tired of the ongoing danger he constantly brings. He's also suicidal, at first not outwardly, so when discussing the situations he brings upon himself and how he seems to make a sport out of it, it's made evident he doesn't care if he lives or dies, and I'm nearly positive he chooses dangerous situations in the hopes he will die. Passive suicidal thoughts are a real thing. This lack of caring for his own life bleeds onto others. The last problem I want to address is that he's guarded. He carries a self-imposed cross. He does all these things but doesn't let anyone in. He doesn't even let grace in fully. People around him recognize this fatal flaw and begin prying, especially in Season 5. By this point, he is not the self-assured Tommy, instead a paranoid, erratic behaving Tommy. He can no longer hide his fallacies. But what he never realized is that everyone knew they were already there. He thought if he just medicated with opium and alcohol, he could keep it together and be the strongman he wanted everyone to think he was. He always had something to prove. To his family, to fellow gangs, to the bars, places, the Peaky Blinders controlled, the world, really. People can't live life like that, especially someone with as many problems as Tommy does. In the latest season, we're shown he has seen a psychiatrist, but he quits only after a few sessions. Ada implores him to continue, but he refuses. Once again, this is a very realistic portrayal of people struggling with mental illness. They no longer bear the capacity to know what's best for them, especially if they're having a less than desirable reaction to meds. The little blue bottles that are making him hallucinate his dead wife who's telling him to commit suicide. So, in summary, Thomas Shelby, ruthless, literally insane, charming and charismatic leader of the Peaky Blinders. He's blessed with good looks, so Happy Cillian portrays him. Cunning, coming up with grace, being an STD-ridden whore to save her from being raped is a perfect example of this, and luck. He's equally cursed with mental illness issues, an overly ambitious mind, and a sense of entitlement that is quickly proving to be his undoing. Tommy isn't someone the audience is supposed to like. He's a murderer, a con artist, a thief, a gangster. He uses people, even his family, as a means to his own end. He is violent and unstable. However, we're shown the world through his eyes. We are shown a world of injustice. We're shown a horribly skewed playing field. We are shown heartache and misery. We're shown the ugly and very real side of someone struggling with comorbid mental illness. We're shown an awakening, an enlightenment of the worst sort. Nothing is sacred. Not your country, not your government, not your God, not even your houses of worship. And whenever something positive happens, it is systematically ripped away from you. You're not supposed to like Tommy, but we are shown where he's coming from. Hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe and comment. Hope I've done justice to one of my favorite characters of all time. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe for more.